We're back discussing environmentally friendly ways to garden and landscape, and Drew Merritt from Humble Roots is with me, and wanted to kind of start this segment off talking briefly about different ways that people could address weed problems instead of just throwing a bunch of chemicals on something. What are some ways that they can go about? But then I would suppose it varies depending on whatever it is that you're trying to kill.
Certainly. I mean, there's some things that are quite easily managed. Some of the annual weeds that you can just, if you stay on it, you pull them before they go to seed. You can drastically reduce their populations pretty easily that way. There's other things such as thistles that if they're really hard to get out of the ground. You almost need a shovel to pull them out. If you break off just the tiniest little chunk of that root, it's going to turn into another plant. So there's plants like weeds like that. Almost suppressing them is the best thing. So using a heavy mulch in your planting. So this is actually a good time of year to be laying down a mulch layer on your gardens. But basically, striving for a full garden that all the space is being used by the plants that you want there, it removes the opportunity for weeds to take root.
So let's discuss soil for a moment. Is soil as important if you're planting an indigenous plant in the dirt that's already there? Do you still need to purchase that that spendy stuff with all the enriched this is and vitamin that and all that, or what's that about?
I mean, since we live in such a varied region between almost rainforest to desert, there's each plant has its own requirements to some extent. But let's say we're in the Dalles, there's certainly a plant community that can be used here in the native soils quite easily. I mean, these plants have been growing in the soil for thousands and thousands of years. They're used to it. That's what they need for the most part. There are definitely certain ways to improve your soil. I was talking about mulch before. That's a great idea because using mulch and letting the leafy debris from your garden stay on the ground rather than tidying it up each year and raking it all away, allowing those to break down and allowing the organisms to get into that mix that actually do the decomposing and start breaking down the nutrients into the soil just adds a tremendous amount of viability to the soil. Prior to planting a garden, incorporating just some organic matter, just aged bark dust, mulched leaves, that sort of thing, actually mixing that into any soil will improve its ability to both drain water as well as retain moisture. I know that sounds kind of conflicting ideas,
yeah.
but it actually allows, it keeps the soil wet enough but not too wet, basically.
Okay.
And that can reduce your irrigation needs as well.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying to actually leave the leaves on your lawn.
Well, lawn's a different situation.
Lawn's different, okay.
Which, that's a whole other topic there.
Maybe that's what I was wanting to hear.
It's in your flower beds, when you're trying to actually, allowing that debris to break down is going to, if you think of a tree in the woods, it's dropping its leaves, those leaves break down, that becomes the soil that tree is using to grow. So it's almost growing from its own materials in a way, but having been transformed by the organisms and breaking down.
Right.
But tidying things up also, like pulling all your leaves out of your garden, also removes a lot of habitat for a lot of the insects that act as predator insects against your pests. I mean, people have problems with earwigs getting into their cabbage, say. That's a huge problem around here. Earwigs actually don't eat vegetables if they have enough other insects to eat. So providing shelter for them as well as habitat for their food, which is all the organisms that are breaking down the debris, will keep them off your vegetables because they're plenty more occupied with that. But once you remove everything else and all you have is your plant, that's the only option. They're going to go for that. So kind of allowing, you're a diverse ecosystem, basically, is what you're striving for. Because the more diversity in any ecosystem is going to provide an element of balance as well as integrity to it as far as having to cope with any extremes, be it insect attacks or drought.
Yeah. So part of that diversity then would actually be sort of just allowing nature to run its course and not always cleaning everything up and raking everything away and bagging everything up and throwing chemicals on it to kill different insects. That's actually kind of counterproductive in a sense. Oh,
certainly. Like taking aphids, for instance. You go out, you see your plants covered in aphids, whatever it be, and you run for, if you're not using chemicals, you run for the neem oil to spray on there. And you end up killing all these aphids, but you're also killing the food source for the insects that eat those aphids. So there's no chance for those populations to develop. So usually, I mean, a lot of our native species have their own individual aphids that attack them, and then there's the ladybugs or lacewings that attack those aphids. And the plants are used to that whole process, so it doesn't really impact them as much as certain other ornamental varieties of plants. But allowing that whole process to take place, I mean, you might have a plant that's infested with aphids. It might take a week or 2 weeks, but eventually the predators will make their way in there, and overnight there's all little dead aphid bodies all over your plant pretty much at that point. So allowing nature to run its course actually removes the need for a lot of these garden practices that conventional landscapes require.
So allowing the earth to kind of do it, the earth and nature to do its thing. And there was actually, I wanted to kind of, because we got to get the show wrapped up here, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to, there was, and I cannot think of, I've been trying to think of it while we were talking, but I had seen a piece on sort of like if man was pulled off earth and, nature was allowed to just do its thing. Almost everything that we see, from buildings to roads, all of it, would within a matter of years to 100, 200 years almost be completely eradicated. Is it really like that?
I mean, it certainly makes sense to me. I mean, there's definitely different situations. I mean, you take, like, say, the Pueblo dwellings in the southwest, where there's very arid climate, where things don't break down quite as quickly. I mean, some things will be left for a long time, certainly our plastics, of course. But ecologically speaking, I mean, there is an issue where we have all these non-native species that are pretty adept at crowding out our native species. So I don't know if we're ever going to be able to revert back to a native state in this ecosystem with or without us. But a lot of the plants that are easily colonizing species, it's pretty amazing how fast they can take over already existing spots. The horsetail, for instance, which is a lot of people consider a weed. I mean, it's a prehistoric plant. I mean, they used to be as tall as trees, but they're tough little things. I mean, they can push through 2 inches of asphalt. They're the first things to push through the lava from Mount St. Helens, and that only took a couple of years. Or the lava flows from Mount St. Helens, that took a couple of years. So I mean, it's amazing their ability to come back and fight their way back.
Yeah.
But we do stand a chance of ending up with a very different situation here as far as the non-native species go, because they're just here instead of evolving with all the species and being in balance. It's definitely thrown off balance, and I don't know how much the human population, if it's going to be a good thing without us, because we're the ones managing these weeds now. We're the ones putting up the fight, and without us, I mean, it's going to be out of control.
Yeah.
But obviously the earth abides,
yeah,
and the ecosystems will evolve and adapt. The diversity might be limited for a long time, but I certainly have plenty of faith in the planet and life on Earth that it'll certainly come back and be as amazing as it is now.
All right. Well, cool stuff. Well, Drew, thank you very much.
Appreciate
it. We could have, I mean, obviously there would have been, there's so much stuff that we could talk about, so we'll have to have you back and you can tell us more about responsible and environmentally friendly landscaping and gardening. So, you guys, thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time right here on Localite. John Compton here saying thanks again for watching. And remember, if you've got a guest idea, let us know. Just visit localite.com.